What happens when a billionaire used to controlling everything suddenly loses the one thing he can't fix? Elliot Barrett built an empire from logic, numbers, and precision. But when tragedy left his young son, Leo, disabled and withdrawn, no amount of money could bring back the light in the boy's eyes. Then, on a routine flight, something unthinkable happened. A black flight attendant, Amara Cole, broke protocol and offered Leo something his father never had the chance to lead. What was supposed to be a simple act of kindness sparked a chain of events that would shake the walls of power, challenge long-held assumptions, and force a grieving father to ask, can you truly love someone if you never let them try? And more importantly, what if healing doesn't come from helping, but from stepping aside? This isn't just a story about disability, class, or race. It's a story about courage, dignity, and the quiet revolution of letting go. If this already touches your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. And now, let's begin. The hum of jet engines mixed with the occasional clink of glasses in the first-class cabin of Flight 417 headed from New York to San Francisco. Outside the windows, a wall of clouds loomed thick, gray, and indifferent. Inside, everything was polished perfection. Everything. Except the way he sat. Elliot Barrett, founder of Helix Tech, billionaire, widower. He wore wealth like a second skin custom charcoal blazer, noise-canceling headphones, Rolex that never left his wrist. Across from him, in a reclined seat, sat his 11-year-old son, Leo Barrett. Leo stared silently out the window, his right leg stiffened in a lightweight brace, his left hand curled tightly around a small toy airplane. He hadn't spoken in hours. He rarely did anymore, not since the accident. A few rows down, flight attendant Amara Cole moved with measured grace. Her uniform crisp, her voice calm but warm. She had a way of noticing what others missed, the jittery fingers of a nervous flyer, a forgotten blanket for a child, a father's glance not quite meeting his son's. When turbulence rocked the plane slightly, Leo looked up, not at his father, but at Amara, who was checking the overhead bins. Their eyes met. She smiled gently. "Want to help me with the cart?" she whispered, crouching down beside his seat. Her voice was careful, quiet enough that only he could hear. "We've got snacks to deliver." Leo blinked, then nodded. Once. From the corner of his eye, Elliot looked up, frowning. "He's fine," he said, more to himself than to her. "He doesn't need to be distracted." But Amara wasn't looking at him. She was already unlocking the cart and gently guiding it toward Leo. She turned to the boy, gave a small salute, and asked, "Captain Leo, will you co-pilot with me?" It was a question that hung in the air like a dare, soft but electrifying. Leo adjusted in his seat, reached out his hand, and slowly, almost awkwardly, touched the handle of the cart. It screeched softly as the wheels turned. No one had ever let him touch anything on a plane. The cabin fell still, one by one. Heads turned. A man with a suit 3 seats down paused mid-email. An older woman clutched her pearls as if decorum were being violated. A mother with a toddler stared openly. And Elliot. He froze. For a moment, his perfectly timed world stood still. "What is she doing?" he whispered to himself. Amara didn't explain. She simply adjusted her pace to Leo's slow push. His brace clicked with each tiny step he took beside her. Click, roll, breathe. Her voice, now loud enough for others to hear, carried like a melody down the aisle. "First stop, row 3. We've got pretzels and kindness coming through." A few passengers chuckled nervously. A few smiled, but many still stared. It wasn't the act itself that shocked them. It was the permission. A black flight attendant letting a disabled child take charge and first-class unspoken rules were being broken. From his seat, Elliot stood halfway, his lips parted. "Miss, what do you think you're doing?" Amara turned her head slightly, but didn't let go of the cart, helping your son feel seen. Her voice was steady, unapologetic. That one line hit Elliot in a place deeper than he'd expected. He looked at Leo, whose eyes, for the first time in months, had a quiet glow. Not excitement, not happiness. Something deeper. Agency. Then, a different voice cut through the cabin. "Miss Cole, step aside. That's not protocol." It was Samuel DeVries, the flight supervisor. "This isn't a daycare," he snapped, "and this is not how we handle first-class guests." The moment shattered. Amara slowly let go of the cart. She turned to Leo, crouched again to his level, and said softly, "Thank you for flying with me, Captain. You were excellent." Leo blinked fast. His mouth opened, searching for words, but nothing came out. She removed her service pin quietly and placed it on the tray beside him. Then she walked to the rear of the plane, the whisper of her shoes on the carpet, the only sound in a cabin full of questions. Elliot remained standing, his fists clenched, his son still holding the cart handle. Elliot didn't speak for the remainder of the flight. He sat rigid in his seat, hands clasped so tightly they turned white. He wasn't sure what he was more disturbed by, the breach of control or the fact that his son had smiled. Not a full smile, just the ghost of one. But it was more emotion than Leo had shown in months. When the plane touched down, the usual rustle of coats and carry-ons filled the cabin. Amara didn't return to first class. Another attendant handed out mints and goodbyes. Leo, now seated again, turned to his father. Where did she go? Elliot adjusted his cufflinks. She overstepped. Leo blinked. She was kind. The words were so soft, they were nearly lost in the hum of the engines. Elliot looked at his son, really looked at him, and saw something unusual. A kind of quiet protest. It wasn't a tantrum. It wasn't a request. It was disappointment. The penthouse glistened in its usual sterility glass. Chrome. Cold light. Elliot poured himself a whiskey and stood by the window overlooking the city. His phone buzzed with texts about board meetings and stock prices, but his mind kept returning to the aisle. To that moment, Leo pushing the cart with Amara's steady presence beside him. Elliot had read every book on trauma recovery, hired the best specialists, designed personalized digital therapy tools. Yet not one of them had unlocked that expression on Leo's face. He didn't know what to call it. Pride, freedom, presence. He took another sip, then opened his laptop and typed Amara Cole, flight attendant, Helix Air. Nothing. He scrolled further. A small article popped up from a local newsletter. Wings of Us Adaptive Skies program gives children a chance to fly. His eyes narrowed. There was a photo, fuzzy and unprofessional, but unmistakable. Amara, in a faded sweatshirt, guiding a group of children through what looked like a makeshift airplane cockpit in a community rec center. He clicked on the About page. A line stood out. Every child deserves a window seat to their own future. There was a class schedule, Tuesdays and Thursdays. No contact info beyond a single email and a QR code. Elliot copied it, then hesitated. He stared at the message window for a long time. Typed, "This is Elliot Barrett. I'd like to talk." Deleted it. Typed again. "You put my son in danger." Deleted that too. Eventually, he closed the laptop. Elliot was in the lobby of Helix Tech HQ when a familiar voice stopped him. "Mr. Barrett." He turned. Amara, in civilian clothes jeans, clean sneakers, a windbreaker. Her hair was tied up neatly, and in her hands was a plain envelope. Elliot raised an eyebrow. "You're bold, showing up here." "I didn't come to ask for my job back," she said calmly. "I came because your son smiled." He crossed his arms. "That wasn't your place." She tilted her head slightly. "Was it yours to decide he never gets to?" The words struck like a quiet slap. Elliot gestured toward a quiet corner of the lobby. 5 minutes. They sat across from each other, him still wearing the armor of a $1,000 suit, her dressed like someone who worked with children, not billionaires. He studied her. She didn't fidget, didn't try to justify herself, only watched him with eyes that had clearly seen more than most. "What's your background?" he asked. "Does that change what happened?" "No," he admitted, "but it tells me whether I should take you seriously." She nodded. "Bachelor's in child psychology. Master's, unfinished. Had to leave school to care for my brother. He had cerebral palsy. I worked nights. Then I flew, because planes gave me peace." Elliot paused. "And Wings of Us started with 5 kids and an old cockpit simulator someone was throwing away. Now we've got 22 children and not enough volunteers." He tapped the envelope she brought. Inside was a flyer, handmade. The header read, "Every kid deserves the right to feel capable, even in mid-air." He looked up. "You planned this, didn't you?" She shook her head. "No. But when I saw your son stand up, I knew not to waste it." "Stand up." He barely moved. "No, Mr. Barrett," she said, gently but firmly. He chose to move. "That's different." Elliot fell silent. A security guard glanced their way. He waved him off. "I could make a donation," he said finally, "if that's what this is." "It's not," she replied. He blinked. "What is this?" Then she stood up. "A chance. For Leo. For you. For something real." She placed the flyer down, turned, walked toward the revolving doors. Elliot watched her go, and for the second time in 3 days, he said nothing. Amara Cole stood at the back of the community center gym, arms folded across her chest, watching the barely functioning flight simulator whir to life. The lighting flickered. One of the pedals stuck every third press. The screen had a faint greenish hue like it belonged in a 1998 video game. But the kids didn't care. Their joy was real, unfiltered, loud. Wheelchairs squeaked. Laughter echoed. One girl shouted, "I landed it," and everyone cheered as if she'd touched down a 747 at JFK. Behind her, a voice asked, cautiously, "Do you think he'll actually come?" Amara didn't turn. No. Her sister, Naima, leaned against the wall beside her. She wore a red headscarf and a denim jacket covered in small pins that said things like, "Inclusion is power," and "Grace over grit." Naima smiled gently. "You sound disappointed." "I'm not." "You always say that when you are." Amara let out a quiet laugh. I don't think men like him come to places like this. They build towers, not wings." Elliot Barrett stood in front of Leo's bedroom door. The therapist had canceled last minute. The aide was out sick. It was just them. He knocked lightly. No answer. He pushed the door open. Leo was on the floor, playing with the old toy plane Amara had returned to him after the flight. He was rolling it gently along the edge of his blanket, like it was taxiing on a runway. "You really liked her, didn't you?" Elliot asked, his voice low. Leo didn't look up, just nodded. "She invited you to that simulator place." Still nothing. Elliot sat down slowly on the floor, opposite his son, a mirror image. She could have made this easy. Ask for money. I would have written the check. But she didn't. Leo finally looked up. I want to go. 3 words. Elliot swallowed hard. What if it's not safe? Leo didn't flinch. It's worth it. The building was a former maintenance hangar converted into a community rec space nestled behind an aging strip mall in Oakland. Elliot's car stood out like a sore thumb in the cracked parking lot, sleek, black, polished, out of place, like him. Leo was already at the door, adjusting his lightweight brace, backpack slung over one shoulder. I'll be back at 5, Elliot said. I'll wait in the car. Leo didn't reply. He just walked in, and the door closed behind him. Elliot sat in the car, watching the minutes tick by. He opened his laptop, checked market trends, skimmed headlines, ignored texts. Then he looked up. Something had shifted in him since that day on the plane. He couldn't name it, but he recognized it. He wanted to understand. He got out of the car. Amara was showing Leo how to adjust the throttle on the simulator. She wasn't hovering. She wasn't correcting. She was watching him, letting him lead. Elliot stepped in quietly. Unnoticed at first, he saw other children, some in wheelchairs, others with hearing aids. A boy using a voice tablet to communicate moving through different stations. A girl painted wings on the wall. A boy built a cardboard runway with unmatched focus. This wasn't a classroom. It was a cockpit of potential. Leo reached forward and pulled the lever. The old screen flickered. He grinned. Elliot had to steady himself against the doorframe. Amara turned, saw him. She didn't smile or act surprised, just walked over slowly and said, "You came." He nodded. I didn't want to, but he did. They stood together, watching Leo guide the simulator into a virtual takeoff. He's focused, Elliot observed. He's free, she replied. Apoena. They sat on a bench behind the building. The sky glowed soft orange, airplanes cutting trails through the horizon. Why planes? Elliot finally asked. Amara looked ahead. My brother. Malik. He couldn't walk on his own, spent most of his life watching the world from a bed or a chair. She paused. But whenever we'd go to the airport to pick someone up, something changed in him. The moment those engines roared, he'd sit taller, like he was already flying. Elliot didn't speak, just listened. After he passed, she continued. I couldn't look at planes the same way. Until one day I realized maybe I could finish his flight for him. He looked at her, really looked this time. Why didn't you take my offer last time, he asked. Because your son doesn't need another expert with a clipboard. He needs someone who listens when he doesn't speak. That line cut deeper than he wanted to admit. Elliot stood up. I'll be back Thursday. Amara raised an eyebrow. To observe, to follow, he said softly. At least this time. Thursday arrived with an overcast sky, mirroring the haze inside Elliot Barrett's chest. He sat in the back seat of the Bentley, parked again in the cracked lot outside Wings of Us. Unlike last time, he wasn't wearing a tailored blazer or leather shoes, just jeans, loafers, and a sweater he hadn't worn since his wife's funeral. Maybe it's better not to look rich here, he'd told himself that morning. But even dressed down, he still looked like someone who belonged to another world. Inside the center, Leo was already at the simulator, his posture confident, his hand steady on the controls. Amara stood near him but kept her distance. She wasn't guiding anymore. She was witnessing, and that difference meant everything. At 4:32 p.m., the front door opened with a clang. In stepped 2 women in professional attire, holding cameras. Behind them was a man with a clipboard. Naima rushed over, alarmed. "They're from Bay Current," she whispered to Amara. "Local media said they got wind of something called Wings for the Elite Son." Ring a bell, Amara's heart dropped. "You didn't, I didn't, but someone leaked it. Might have been one of the parents." She glanced at Elliot. He hadn't moved from the corner, but he was watching them. Tense, guarded, defensive. The reporter approached Amara. "We'd love to do a story on the program. The photos on your website are powerful, but knowing Leo Barrett is involved takes this to a whole new level." Elliot stepped forward. "No comment," he said sharply. "My son is not a PR tool." The woman smiled politely. "Then maybe let us speak with Ms. Cole. It's her program." Amara raised her hand gently. "This isn't the time." Leo, who had been focused on the simulator, looked up. He saw the cameras, the strangers, his father's rigid posture, and for a moment he shrank. Then something changed. Leo stood up, slowly. His brace creaked as he took one step, then another. Everyone froze. Elliot instinctively took a step forward, his hand twitching, but Amara placed a hand on his arm. "Don't," she whispered. "Let him lead." Leo reached the center of the room. The camera pointed at him. He didn't speak. He just raised one hand, then bent his elbow and gave a small pilot salute, just like Amara had done with him on the flight. The room erupted in applause. Not a performance, not staged, just a boy claiming space that had always been denied to him. Elliot lowered his head. His chest ached in a strange, unfamiliar way. He wasn't embarrassed. He was breaking open. The reporter turned toward Elliot. "Mr. Barrett, would you like to say a few words?" He hesitated. His throat was tight. Years of polished interviews, investor calls, and board speeches. But this was different. Amara stepped beside him, sensing his hesitation. "You don't have to say anything," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, I think I finally do." He turned to face the small crowd, parents, children, volunteers, media. "My name is Elliot Barrett. I'm Leo's father." A pause. "For 2 years, I've poured millions into therapies, specialists, technologies, all trying to fix a boy I barely understood." The room was quiet. "I thought control was love, that if I directed everything, he'd be safe. But the truth is, I was terrified." He looked at Amara. "It took someone I almost fired, who barely spoke a word to me, to show me that what my son needed wasn't more solutions." He glanced at Leo. It was the freedom to try. The reporter raised her mic. "Is it true that you tried to shut down this program?" He exhaled. "It's true that I ignored it. 3 separate proposals sat in my inbox. I never read them, because I thought, what could a flight attendant know that experts didn't?" A longer pause. "Turns out, everything." After the reporters left, Elliot and Amara sat again on the bench out back. He looked older now, not tired, just honest. "You really set this up well," he said quietly. Amara shook her head. "No. You just finally stepped into the frame." He smiled. "Barely. Was it all a test?" She turned to him. "No, but it was a window, and you finally opened it." He looked toward the sky. "I've always believed that money fixes things. That's how I survived, how I built everything." Amara looked at him, her voice soft. "But your son doesn't need you to build him a future." He met her eyes. "He needs me to walk beside him." She nodded. "Exactly." As the sun dipped, Leo walked outside. In his hands was a cardboard wing he'd painted himself. He handed it to his father. On it were scribbled words in uneven marker strokes. "We don't need perfect flights. We just need to fly." Elliot read it, read it again, and this time, the tears didn't stay behind his eyes. He reached for his son, not to guide him, not to steady him, just to hold him, gently, like he'd never dared to before. The media firestorm started slow. At first, it was just a local story. Former flight attendant's community program helps CEO's son take first step on his own. Then it hit the wires. Suddenly, Elliot Barrett's name trended again, not for a stock move, not for a startup acquisition, but for something softer, something rare. A pause, a pivot, a human moment. Photos of Leo at Wings of Us, hands on the simulator, walking independently with a cardboard wing strapped to his back, spread faster than a product launch. Reporters knocked. Analysts speculated. The public wasn't sure what to make of it. And Elliot, he didn't hide. Cameras flashed as Elliot stood behind the podium, not in a tailored suit, but in a soft blue sweater. He adjusted the mic with hands that shook slightly. "I'm not here to talk about quarterly earnings," he began. "I'm here to talk about accountability." The room went still. I once believed power meant control, that every risk needed to be neutralized, that every problem needed a solution. He looked down, then up again. But in trying to protect my son, I kept him from leading his own life, until someone had the courage to let him take a single, shaky step on his own. He paused. "I'm proud to announce that the Barrett Foundation will fully fund Wings of Us for the next 5 years, including the construction of a permanent aviation rehabilitation center in Oakland." Cameras snapped. Journalists scrambled to type. "But there's one condition," he continued, firm. "Amara Cole retains complete autonomy. No corporate boards, no branding deals, no red tape." He stepped back from the podium. A journalist called out, "Mr. Barrett, what changed your mind?" He looked directly at the camera. My son led, I followed. Construction began quickly. Bulldozers cleared a long abandoned lot behind the community center. Plans were drawn, permits signed. But what made this project different was who had input: children, parents, teachers, therapists, and Amara. She didn't want glass towers or smart boards. She wanted sensory rooms, adaptive simulation labs, quiet corners for overwhelmed days. Everything was purposeful. Everything was human. And Elliot. He showed up, not as a donor, as a father. He took notes, asked questions, read research articles Amara gave him about movement autonomy, trauma-informed design, and the neuroscience of freedom. Sometimes he'd sit with Naima and help hang art from the kids. One afternoon, Amara found him alone, staring at a wall. It was covered in drawings of planes, clouds, and runways. At the center, a quote scribbled in crayon. "Let me try. That's all I ask. Leo." He didn't turn when she approached. "She used to say that too." He murmured. "Your wife Amara asked." He nodded. "Claire always told me. Letting go doesn't mean you love less. It means you trust more." A pause. I didn't trust anyone after she died, especially myself. Amara stayed silent. Sometimes the heart doesn't need answers, just room. The simulator had been upgraded, but Leo still loved the old one. He called it Captain Tin. He became something of a guide for new kids, especially the ones who were nervous or unsure. He didn't give long instructions, just smiled and said, "Wanna fly with me?" It was enough. One child, a 6-year-old girl named Maya with no verbal speech, cried the first time her mom left the room. Leo took her hand, helped her climb into the cockpit. and sat quietly beside her. 10 minutes later, she stopped crying. 20 minutes in, she reached for the throttle. Elliot, watching from the observation window, wiped his eyes quietly, not because he was proud, because he was learning. Later that evening, as Elliot helped stack chairs after a volunteer night, Amara asked something unexpected. "Do you know why I let Leo push the cart that day?" He smiled softly. "Because you're brave." She shook her head. "No. Because I saw myself in him. Because I knew what it felt like to be capable, but invisible." She looked at him, voice steady. "And because in that moment I stopped asking permission." He nodded. "Thank you," he said, "for what she asked. For doing the thing I never had the guts to do." He said, "Trust someone else's lead." The grand opening of the new wings of US Rehabilitation Center didn't look like any ribbon-cutting Elliot Barrett had ever attended. There were no CEOs in suits, no champagne glasses or glossy photo backdrops. Instead, the courtyard was filled with painted cardboard planes, chalk drawings of clouds, and children in motion, some with braces, some with wheels, some with guides, but all of them moving with intention, moving without fear. At the center of it all stood Leo, now 12, now steady, now smiling, not as a boy trying to prove anything, but as a kid who belonged. He led a small choreographed routine with 3 other children. It was simple step, turn, point. But it had taken months to prepare, and years to believe it was possible. Leo wore a single lightweight brace now, only on days when the muscles ached. As he raised his arms and shifted his balance, Amara watched from the back of the courtyard. She didn't instruct, didn't clap the loudest. She just witnessed, like always. Elliot stood a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes misting as Leo finished the last movement and bowed slightly. The crowd clapped, but Leo didn't look at them. He looked at the girl beside him, a younger child who had stumbled halfway through the routine and gently whispered something only she could hear. She smiled. That was the real finale. Amara and Elliot sat on the rooftop garden of the new center. Below them, parents packed up snacks, volunteers folded chairs, and kids, tired and thrilled, chased each other down the halls. "I never thought I'd see this day," Amara said. "You built it," Elliot replied. She shook her head. "I helped," she corrected. "But this came from all those kids who dared to show up." He nodded. Then, after a pause, "Why didn't you ever accept my apology?" Amara looked at him. "Because you never gave it," she said softly. "You funded us. You stood by us. You learned, but you never said it." He exhaled. "I'm sorry, Amara." She smiled gently. "I know." That evening, as the sun dropped into the bay, Leo and Elliot sat in the simulator room. The original machine, old, glitchy, and still covered in stickers, had been preserved. Leo ran his hand over the worn throttle. "I remember the first time I touched this," he said. Elliot nodded. "I remember the first time I let you." Leo looked up at his father. "I wasn't asking permission." Elliot smiled. "I know." They sat in silence. Then Leo asked, "Do you think Mom would have liked this place?" Elliot swallowed hard. "She would have built it with her bare hands." Leo grinned. "Good, because next year I want to teach the new kids how to taxi." Elliot laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. In a world driven by control, data, and results, sometimes the most powerful thing we can do is step back, let someone smaller, quieter, take the lead, This is not a story about wealth. It's a story about worth, about how a single act of trust can unlock a world someone was told they'd never reach, and how even the most powerful man in the room can still learn to follow. Sometimes the most life-changing moments don't come with fanfare. They come in silence, in the space where a child is finally allowed to try, and a powerful man learns to follow. This story reminds us it doesn't take a title to lead, it doesn't take a fortune to heal, and it doesn't take perfection to be enough. But it does take courage to trust, to let go, to stand beside someone, not above them. Amara's quiet strength, Leo's gentle bravery, and Elliot's transformation weren't just about one family. They're about all of us. About the assumptions we carry, the silent prejudices we uphold, and the beautiful, human things we might miss when we only see class, color, or ability. If this story touched your heart, if it made you feel, reflect, or even question something, please like, share, and subscribe. Because this isn't the end. It's just the beginning of many stories we need to tell. Stories of love, dignity, and the kind of change that starts with a single step. Until next time, keep leading with heart, and keep listening when the quiet ones speak.